Welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. On a misty autumn morning, Whitcombe Manor stood silent. Yet within its ancient walls, a young heiress had vanished without a trace. A single silk glove, a cryptic letter, and footprints that led nowhere. Hercule Poirot would soon discover that not all secrets sleep quietly. Who betrayed her? And who can be trusted when the past hides in every shadow? Chapter 1. The invitation. The morning was crisp, the kind of morning that carried with it the faint perfume of autumn leaves drifting lazily down from tall London trees. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in his armchair, sipping his customary hot chocolate rather than the English tea that so many preferred. His small, neat flat in Whitehaven Mansions was bathed in a gentle stream of sunlight that made the polished silver on the table gleam. Everything, as always, was arranged with the utmost precision. His morning newspaper folded squarely, his shoes aligned at a perfect angle, his moustache waxed to immaculate symmetry. It was then that the letter arrived. A discreet knock upon the door, the shuffle of the concierge, and Poirot received a heavy cream-coloured envelope sealed with a coat of arms. The very sight of it spoke of old wealth, tradition, and mystery. Poirot's eyebrows rose with delicate curiosity. With careful fingers, he slit the envelope open. Inside lay words written in an elegant, hurried hand. Monsieur Poirot, I find myself in need of your discretion and your genius. Matters at Whitcombe Manor have grown uneasy. I cannot say more in writing. I beg of you to visit at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Lady Arabella Whitcombe Poirot. Read the letter twice, then thrice, each time narrowing his eyes and tilting his head. Uneasy. Mais oui, the word is chosen with much care, he murmured. She does not write of danger. She does not write of crime. But uneasy. That speaks of shadows within the house, of secrets that weigh heavy. He placed the letter upon the mantelpiece and leaned back. To many, it might have seemed a trivial invitation from a wealthy heiress. But to Poirot, who believed firmly that the smallest words could conceal the largest troubles, it was enough to stir his instinct for mystery. That evening, Poirot prepared to depart for Kent. His small valise was packed with meticulous order: 2 suits, gloves, brushes, and a carefully folded silk cravat. As he checked each item, he allowed himself a little smile. A country house, a family of lineage, and a lady who trembles in her letter. Mon Dieu, it has all the flavour of intrigue. Already I sense it. Within those walls there is tension that one does not see, but one can almost smell. The journey to Whitcombe Manor began early the next morning. As the train pulled from London, the cityscape dissolved into rolling fields and quiet villages, shrouded in a mist that clung low over the earth. Poirot, seated by the window, watched in silence. The rhythm of the wheels upon the rails was soothing, but his thoughts were sharp. Who was Lady Arabella? Why did she, an heiress of stature and fortune, reach out to him so secretly? When the train arrived at the quiet countryside station, a carriage awaited him, driven by a liveried servant who bowed respectfully. The road wound through tall hedges, damp with dew, and every turn seemed to draw Poirot deeper into history. Finally, the carriage turned up a long gravel path lined with ancient oaks, and there it stood, Whitcombe Manor. The house rose from the mist like a solemn sentinel of centuries past. Its high chimneys reached towards the grey sky. Ivy clung stubbornly to its stone facade, and narrow windows reflected the faint glow of the autumn sun. There was grandeur, yes, but also a heaviness, as though the walls carried within them not only age but burdens long unspoken. As Poirot stepped from the carriage, his patent leather shoes crunching softly on gravel, he looked up at the towering house and whispered, almost to himself, "Voila! Already the air carries unease. The lady has summoned Hercule Poirot, and Hercule Poirot shall discover what troubles lie behind these ancient walls. And with that, the mystery began. Chapter 2. Whitcombe Manor. The carriage wheels rolled gently over the gravel, their sound echoing softly in the morning stillness. Hercule Poirot, seated with immaculate posture, adjusted his cuffs and allowed his eyes to wander across the sweeping grounds. Whitcombe Manor was no ordinary country estate. Its gardens stretched wide and wild, not the neatly trimmed flower beds of modern fashion, but vast lawns that carried the air of ancient privilege. Tall oaks and yew trees stood like guardians, their leaves whispering faintly in the autumn breeze. Somewhere, a distant crow cawed, a sound that struck the air with an oddly foreboding note. The manor itself grew larger with each turn of the path. Its stone walls bore the weight of centuries, streaked with ivy that clung stubbornly to weathered bricks. A high central tower rose against the pale sky, casting a long shadow across the gravel court. To the untrained eye, it was a picture of dignity. To Poirot's little grey cells, it whispered of secrets, of generations who had lived, fought, loved, and perhaps plotted beneath its roof. The carriage drew to a halt before the great oak doors. As Poirot alighted, his polished shoes tapping neatly on the stone, the doors creaked open. A butler appeared, an elderly man with a face as lined as parchment, his expression grave yet courteous. "Welcome to Whitcombe Manor, Monsieur Poirot," he said in a voice low and steady. "Her ladyship awaits you." Poirot inclined his head, his keen eyes noting the faint tremor in the man's hand as he gestured inside. The detective never overlooked such details. "Merci, monsieur," Poirot replied gently. "It seems I am expected." Inside, the manor's hall was vast, lined with ancestral portraits whose eyes followed every visitor with silent judgment. Tapestries hung heavy upon the walls, their colours faded yet still vibrant with scenes of battle and hunt. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of wood smoke from the great hearth. Poirot's gaze lingered on a suit of armour that stood gleaming in the corner, its visor down as though concealing a watchful face. One by one, members of the household appeared to greet him. First came Sir Reginald Whitcombe, the patriarch of the family. Tall, severe, with a face carved in stern lines, he extended a hand more out of duty than warmth. His voice was clipped, precise. "Monsieur Poirot, you are most welcome. My daughter speaks highly of your abilities." Yet his eyes, cold and commanding, betrayed not welcome but suspicion, as though Poirot's very presence threatened the family's dignity. Then, with a rustle of silk, appeared Lady Arabella Whitcombe. She was young, no more than 25, with an elegance that spoke of wealth, yet her beauty was touched by unease. Her hands, slender and pale, twisted lightly together as though in constant nervous movement. Her eyes, dark and luminous, darted from face to face, never resting long. When they met Poirot's, he saw in them both fear and hope. She offered a smile that trembled. "It is an honour, Monsieur Poirot." "I cannot tell you how relieved I am that you have come," Poirot bowed deeply. "Mademoiselle, the honour is mine. I am here to serve truth, and truth, it always makes itself heard, n'est-ce pas?" Standing slightly apart was James Whitcombe, Arabella's cousin. He was a man of lively charm, his smile quick and confident, though his restless eyes betrayed a nervous energy. He spoke too cheerfully, as though determined to mask tension with bravado. "Ah, Poirot, I've heard of you. The great solver of puzzles, eh? Well, Whitcombe Manor could certainly use a little excitement." His laughter rang false, lingering a second too long. Last, quietly entering, was Miss Clara Miles, Arabella's companion. Unlike the others, she spoke little. Plain in dress, her hair drawn back simply, Clara's presence was calm yet watchful. She offered Poirot a polite curtsy and lowered her gaze. Yet in the silence, Poirot felt her eyes observing, measuring, weighing everything that passed. The introductions complete, Poirot found himself led into the drawing room, a chamber of velvet drapes and gilt mirrors. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across polished furniture. Conversation began with the usual pleasantries, yet beneath every word Poirot sensed restraint. Each voice seemed careful, each glance brief, as though unseen threads of secrecy wound through the family like ivy around stone. Poirot sat quietly, his moustache twitching as he listened. His little grey cells were already at work. Something was amiss here, something far deeper than a nervous heiress's worries. And though no word had yet been spoken of danger, he felt it in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like the faint rustle of silk in a darkened corridor. Outside, the wind sighed against the manor walls, carrying with it a whisper of mystery. And Poirot, sipping his tea with perfect calm, allowed himself the faintest of smiles. The stage was set. The drama was about to unfold. Chapter 3. The uneasy supper. The bell for supper rang through Whitcombe Manor with a sonorous chime, echoing across the high corridors like a call to judgment. Hercule Poirot, with every hair of his moustache immaculately in place, followed the butler into the grand dining hall. The room itself was a masterpiece of old English nobility, oak-panelled walls dark with age, a long mahogany table stretching almost the length of the chamber, and candlelight glimmering in tall silver holders that threw trembling shadows upon ancestral portraits. As the household assembled, Poirot observed in silence, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Sir Reginald Whitcombe entered first, his expression stern as stone, his steps measured. He sat at the head of the table with a kind of grim authority, as though the weight of centuries pressed upon his shoulders. Beside him took her place Lady Arabella, pale and delicate, her beauty veiled by unease. She smiled faintly at Poirot, but her fingers tapped against the tablecloth in restless rhythm. James Whitcombe, the cousin, arrived with a flourish, laughter too loud, his presence almost exaggerated, as though he were a performer on a stage. He pulled out his chair with unnecessary energy, casting quick glances toward Arabella that betrayed something more than cousinly concern. And at the far end, near the candles, sat Miss Clara Miles, quiet and composed, her watchful eyes hidden behind lowered lashes. Her silence was not of shyness, Poirot noted, but of calculation. The meal began. Silver lids were lifted, releasing the rich aroma of roasted pheasant, root vegetables and sauces spiced with autumn herbs. Crystal glasses were filled with deep red wine that shimmered in the flickering candlelight. At first, conversation flowed in the manner of polite society, comments on the weather, the harvest, and trivial matters of county gossip. Yet beneath it all, a subtle strain lingered, as if each word was chosen with care, and every silence meant more than speech. Poirot, seated at Lady Arabella's right, listened with his serene composure. He watched how Sir Reginald's gaze hardened whenever Arabella spoke, how James deflected questions with charm, and how Clara's lips remained pressed together, releasing only the most cautious remarks. At one moment Arabella reached for her wine. Her hand trembled and the glass chimed faintly against the silver rim of her plate. She caught herself quickly, but Poirot's sharp eyes had already marked it. He leaned slightly toward her. "Madame, you are unwell?" he asked softly. Arabella forced a smile. "Not at all, Monsieur Poirot. Only, the air here is heavy tonight." "Mais oui," Poirot murmured, his gaze flicking about the room. "The air. It is heavy with more than just the season." James laughed suddenly, breaking the tension. "Come now, Poirot. You sound as though you expect a ghost to slip through the walls. Surely you don't think our grand old house hides secrets?" His voice was playful, but his eyes, quick and darting, betrayed nervousness. Poirot replied smoothly, "Every house of such lineage has its secrets, monsieur. The little grey cells, they whisper to me. It is not the stones, but the people within them who tell the stories." For a brief moment, silence fell. The fire crackled in the great hearth. A gust of wind moaned against the tall windows, rattling the panes as if the house itself disapproved of levity. Lady Arabella's fork lay untouched by her plate. Sir Reginald stared into his wine with unspoken severity. Clara's eyes, dark and unreadable, rested on Poirot for the briefest instant, then lowered again. The meal concluded with a dish of custard and autumn fruits, yet hardly a bite was taken. One by one the family excused themselves. Lady Arabella was the first, murmuring of fatigue, her steps quick, almost anxious. James soon followed, his laughter echoing unnaturally as he disappeared down the corridor. Clara slipped away silently, her figure almost blending with the shadows. Only Sir Reginald lingered for a moment, speaking little, before rising with a curt nod. Poirot remained seated, gazing thoughtfully at the now empty chairs. He stroked his moustache with delicate fingers and whispered to himself, "Mon ami, when a family sits together and speaks in such careful tones, there is always a drama beneath the surface. It is like a play, every actor hiding his true lines. But soon, very soon, the truth will demand its entrance upon the stage." Outside, the night deepened, the wind sighing through the ancient trees. Whitcombe Manor slept uneasily, and within its walls secrets waited in silence, ready to stir. Chapter 4. The Morning Alarm. The dawn crept slowly over Whitcombe Manor, painting the horizon with strokes of pale gold and faint rose. Yet inside the house there was no peace to greet the morning. Instead, the stillness of daybreak was shattered by hurried footsteps, urgent whispers, and the sudden frantic pounding upon doors. Poirot, ever the light sleeper, was already awake. He had risen early, his habits precise as a clock. When the knock came upon his chamber, loud, uneven, desperate, he was already dressed, his moustache perfectly arranged. Opening the door, he found the butler, pale as parchment, his breath caught in fear. "Sir, Lady Arabella, she is gone." Poirot's dark eyes flashed with quick intensity, though his voice remained calm as ever. "Gone, you say? Explain yourself, my good man. Not a walk in the garden, non?" The butler shook his head violently. "Her bed is unslept in. Her chamber door was locked from the inside, and the window stands open." Within moments, the manor was alive with confusion. Sir Reginald thundered down the corridor, his dressing gown flowing behind him, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. James appeared shortly after, his expression a mixture of alarm and poorly hidden unease. Clara Miles, pale but composed, walked silently beside the housekeeper, her eyes wide, though her lips tightly sealed. Poirot followed them all into Lady Arabella's room. The chamber was a picture of delicate elegance. Faded rose curtains swayed gently at the window. A writing desk held an untouched quill, and a small porcelain clock ticked steadily upon the mantel. But the bed was unruffled, its coverlet perfectly smooth, as though no one had lain there through the night. Poirot moved slowly, his gaze sweeping the room with methodical precision. On the carpet lay a single silk glove, pale and crumpled as though dropped in haste. He bent down, lifting it carefully between finger and thumb. Curious, one glove without its pair, a lady never leaves so carelessly. He moved to the dressing table. There, among the silver brushes and bottles of scent, he found a faint smear of candle wax upon the polished wood, yet the lamps were electric, the candles untouched. Poirot tapped the mark lightly. A detail? Ah, but details are the things that sing the truth. At the window, the morning air flowed in, cool and sharp. The heavy drapes stirred gently, carrying with them the faintest whisper of damp earth. Below, upon the gravel path, Poirot's sharp eyes discovered footprints, small, dainty impressions leading away from the window and across the garden. But after only a dozen steps, they stopped, fading abruptly as though the walker had vanished into thin air. James, peering over Poirot's shoulder, exclaimed, "There you see. She must have been taken, dragged away." Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, non, mon ami. If she had been dragged, the gravel would tell us so. These prints, they end too perfectly, too suddenly. It is not nature, but arrangement. Someone wished us to believe what is not." Behind him, Sir Reginald's voice rang out, stern and cold. "This is an outrage. Kidnappers on my estate. Preposterous." Yet his words carried more fury than fear, as though the scandal itself wounded him more than the thought of his daughter's safety. Clara Miles stood silently near the window, her hands clasped tightly. Poirot, with one swift glance, noticed her eyes fixed upon the garden, her expression unreadable. The butler wrung his hands nervously. "Shall I send for the constable, sir?" Poirot turned, raising a hand with quiet authority. "No, not yet. To summon the police is to invite noise, confusion and gossip. Let us first consider with the little grey cells. Lady Arabella did not vanish into the mist. No, she was here, and whether she went willingly or unwillingly, someone within this house knows why." The room fell silent at his words. The ticking of the porcelain clock seemed suddenly loud, each beat marking the passage of mystery deeper into shadow. Poirot placed the glove carefully upon the table and straightened his cuffs. "Come, messieurs et mesdames. The game has begun, and Hercule Poirot never plays without finding the truth." Outside, the morning sun rose higher, casting light upon the ancient stones of Whitcombe Manor. Yet within its walls, darkness had settled, quiet and heavy, darkness that whispered of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 5. The clues revealed. The household remained restless after Lady Arabella's disappearance. Murmurs travelled like ghosts along the corridors, servants whispering of kidnappers, of spirits, of curses upon old houses. But Hercule Poirot, in his calm precision, refused to be carried by fear. He spent the morning not in speculation, but in silence, letting his little grey cells stir, weighing every detail against the harmony of truth. After a modest breakfast, an egg, buttered toast cut precisely, and his cherished tisane, Poirot returned alone to Lady Arabella's chamber. He moved as a conductor before an orchestra, guiding his eye over each item, each space, waiting for the silent notes to align into melody. The silk glove, crumpled upon the carpet, was his first pause. Kneeling, Poirot examined its placement. Not near the window, not near the door, but at the centre of the room. "Not dropped in flight," he whispered. No, this was placed, carelessly, yes, but with intent. A glove without its partner is a question waiting for its answer. He moved then to the dressing table. With gloved fingers, Poirot traced the faint smear of candle wax he had seen earlier. The candlesticks stood untouched, their wicks stiff with disuse, yet here was wax, soft, recent. He smiled faintly. Someone brought a candle here. Why, when there is electric light? Ah, mais bien sûr, when one does not wish to be seen from the corridor, one lights a single flame. A secret meeting, perhaps. Crossing to the window, Poirot leaned forward, breathing the damp air of the garden. Below, the footprints lay clear and sharp, neat impressions upon the gravel. He studied them as though they were lines of poetry. They led directly from the sill, precise, deliberate, yet then they stopped. Abruptly. Too abruptly. Voila, he murmured, crouching. The steps are even, the depth equal. The lady descended by her own will, not dragged. But see, here they cease. Pfft, impossible in nature. This is theatre. Someone has swept away the rest to create the illusion of disappearance. Poirot's gaze lifted slowly to the trees beyond the path. A yew hedge cast deep shadows across the lawn, and just within that darkness he saw faint scuff marks, grass pressed down, earth disturbed. A continuation of the trail, but one meant to be overlooked. Poirot tapped his temple with one finger. The footprints were not to guide, but to mislead. Ah, mon ami, already the plot reveals itself. Returning inside, Poirot examined the writing desk. Most of the papers were neat, bills and household notes, but within the drawer he found a corner of torn parchment, barely the size of a handkerchief, upon which were written 2 words in hurried script. Do not. Nothing more, no name, no continuation, just those 2 words, cut short, like a warning stifled. Poirot held it up to the light. A fragment, but fragments are like the threads of a tapestry. Even a single strand may reveal the pattern entire. At that moment, James entered, his step quick, his voice loud as though to disguise unease. Monsieur Poirot, what progress? Have you discovered anything? Poirot turned, his expression mild, his voice smooth as velvet. I discover, Monsieur James, that Lady Arabella left this room not by force, but by her own intention. But, he raised a finger, she was guided, or misled. Someone within these walls aided her, or betrayed her. James laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair. Surely you don't mean one of us? Why? Who could wish her harm? Poirot's eyes narrowed, his moustache twitching. Harm? Perhaps not. But control, inheritance, freedom, these are motives that sing louder than hatred. Behind James, Miss Clara Miles had appeared silently, like a shadow drawn by the tension. Her eyes flicked toward the glove upon the table, then to the scrap of parchment in Poirot's hand. For the briefest instant something passed across her face. Fear or guilt, Poirot could not yet decide. Sir Reginald's voice thundered from the corridor, summoning James away. Clara lingered, lowering her gaze, then turned quickly, her steps soft as she disappeared down the hall. Poirot placed the glove, the wax and the parchment together upon the desk, arranging them as though composing a puzzle. He stood back, his little frame straight and precise, his eyes gleaming. 3 small details. But from such trifles the truth always grows. Lady Arabella has not been stolen away into the night. No, she has been drawn into a drama, a trap, and Hercule Poirot shall unravel it. Thread by delicate thread outside, the autumn wind sighed again through the yew trees, carrying with it the hush of secrets waiting to be spoken. Chapter 6. Suspicions. The corridors of Whitcombe Manor grew heavier with silence as the day advanced. The house, once echoing with the quiet order of servants and the ticking of ancestral clocks, now pulsed with unease. Each step upon the floorboards seemed louder, each door closing carried with it a note of secrecy. Poirot, with his calm precision, had no need for haste. He knew well that the truth, like a shy guest, emerges only when coaxed gently. He began with Sir Reginald Whitcombe, summoning the patriarch into the drawing-room. The fire crackled in the grate, its warmth casting long shadows that flickered against the stern man's face. Sir Reginald stood stiffly, hands clasped behind his back, chin lifted in defiance. Monsieur Poirot, he said, this entire business is an embarrassment. My daughter has simply been foolish, wandering out perhaps to make some childish gesture. I will not have the family name dragged into scandal. Poirot inclined his head, his voice smooth. Ah, mais oui, the name, it is important. But tell me, monsieur, why did Lady Arabella write to me in secrecy? She feared something, or someone. Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. Nonsense. Arabella is impressionable. She allows herself to be swayed by sentiment. No doubt that companion of hers fills her head with fancies. His words were cold, but Poirot detected more than irritation. It was not grief that lined the man's face, but anger. Anger at loss of control, not loss of daughter. When Sir Reginald departed, Poirot sat for a moment in thought, tapping the arm of his chair gently. Control, mon ami, is often a stronger chain than hatred. Next came James Whitcombe, the cousin. He entered with restless energy, pacing even before he was seated, his smile forced, his voice a touch too loud. Well, Poirot, what have you found? Surely this is all a misunderstanding. Arabella was always dramatic. She will turn up soon enough. Poirot folded his hands neatly. Perhaps, monsieur. And yet, it is curious, is it not, that your debts in London weigh heavily upon you? A cousin who inherits nothing is in a difficult position. But if Lady Arabella were to disappear... James laughed sharply, though the sound rang hollow. Come now. You don't mean to suggest me? Why, I would never harm Arabella. We were like brother and sister. Poirot's eyes, steady and unblinking, watched him closely. Mais non, monsieur. I suggest nothing. I merely observe that desperation. It can create strange choices. James shifted uneasily, his charm slipping for an instant. You have quite the imagination, Poirot. Perhaps too much of one. Yet even as he left, Poirot noted the quick glance over his shoulder, as though fearing invisible accusation. Finally, Poirot called for Miss Clara Miles. She entered quietly, hands folded, her plain dress without adornment. Her composure was remarkable. Where the others blustered, Clara was calm. She sat gracefully, her gaze steady yet unreadable. Mademoiselle, Poirot began softly, you are the companion of Lady Arabella. You know her best. Tell me, was she happy here? Clara hesitated only a breath. Lady Arabella, she often felt confined, monsieur. Her father demanded much, and her future was not hers to decide. She longed for freedom. I think her voice was gentle, yet her eyes flickered briefly, as if guarding more than they revealed. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And you, mademoiselle, you wished to help her, perhaps? Clara lowered her gaze. I am her friend. I wished only for her happiness. The words were perfect, yet Poirot heard the quiet note of tension beneath them, like the faint discord of a violin string not quite in tune. He let the silence stretch, but Clara spoke no more. She rose, curtsied lightly, and left the room with steps measured and even. When the door closed, Poirot allowed himself a small sigh. He walked slowly to the tall windows, gazing out at the mist-draped gardens. His reflection in the glass showed the faint gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Each of them hides something, he murmured. The father, his pride, the cousin, his debts, the companion, her secrets. Mon Dieu, it is like the play of shadows upon the wall, and in the centre, Lady Arabella, who vanishes into the night. The fire hissed softly as a log collapsed into embers. Poirot, serene, stroked his moustache with delicate fingers. He was no longer merely an observer. He was the conductor of this symphony of lies. Soon, the notes would rise to their crescendo. Chapter 7. A secret uncovered. The hours passed in hushed unease. Whitcombe Manor seemed to fold in upon itself, its long corridors whispering with secrets, its ancient walls heavy with silence. Hercule Poirot, however, did not hurry. He had the serenity of a man who trusted his little grey cells. Clues, like shy birds, would appear only if he stood still and patient. It was in the library that his patience bore fruit. The chamber stretched high, its shelves crowded with tomes that smelt of leather and dust. A great stone fireplace dominated one wall, above which glared the painted eyes of long-dead Whitcombes. The air was thick, the curtains drawn, and the ticking of an old clock was the only sound. Poirot, running a hand lightly over the spines of the books, felt the familiar tingle of intuition. Somewhere in this room, Lady Arabella had left a piece of herself. He paused before the oak writing desk, its surface polished but scarred with age. To the untrained eye, it was ordinary. To Poirot's, it was a stage upon which a silent drama had played out. Kneeling, he ran his fingers delicately along the drawers. One resisted, barely perceptible, but there. His sharp eyes glimmered. Ah, voilà! With a gentle press upon the carved panel, the drawer slid open, revealing a hollow compartment within. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon, their paper worn from handling. Poirot drew them out carefully, as though they were relics from a shrine. Seating himself by the fire, he began to read. The handwriting was unmistakably Lady Arabella's, elegant, graceful, yet at times rushed, the ink blotted as though written in agitation. I am suffocated, Clara. Father would see me bound to a man I do not love, all for lands and titles. I long for freedom, for escape, for a life not dictated by the cold shadow of Whitcombe pride. Poirot's eyes narrowed, the flame of understanding flickering. So, the unease, it was no phantom of imagination. She wished to flee, and she confided to Clara. Another letter trembled in his fingers. I have an ally, someone who promises to help me. I dare not write the name, even here, but soon I shall be free. Poirot sat very still, the firelight painting his face in gold and shadow. His moustache twitched thoughtfully. An ally within these walls. But is it an ally or a deceiver? The letters grew more urgent as he read on. One line in particular caught his attention. If I vanish, know it was by choice, not by force. But if I do not return, then something has gone terribly wrong. Poirot replaced the bundle with utmost care, his heart calm though his mind sharpened. Lady Arabella had not been stolen in the night like a helpless child. She had planned, prepared, sought escape, but in trusting another, she had placed herself in peril. At that moment, the door creaked softly. Poirot looked up to see Clara Miles standing at the threshold, her figure half lost in shadow. Her face was pale, her hands clasped before her, yet her eyes, those quiet, watchful eyes, were fixed upon the desk. You found them, she whispered. Poirot inclined his head. Oui, mademoiselle. Letters of a heart in despair, of a spirit longing for freedom. She trusted you greatly, it seems. Clara stepped further in, her voice trembling but controlled. She was my dearest friend, Monsieur Poirot. She confided everything to me. I wished to help her, I swear it. Poirot rose, his gaze steady, his tone soothing yet edged with steel. Perhaps, mademoiselle. Yet in such matters, friendship may become the mask of betrayal. Did you help her to freedom, or to something far darker? Clara flinched, her lips parting as if to speak, then closed them again. Without another word, she turned and left, her footsteps quick upon the stone. Poirot stood alone once more in the library, the letters resting on the desk like the heartbeats of the vanished heiress. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the walls, and Poirot whispered to himself, she planned her own escape, yes. But the hand that promised to guide her, mon Dieu, it is the same hand that has led her into danger, and I shall uncover whose hand it was. The library seemed to sigh around him, as though the house itself knew its secrets were no longer safe. Chapter 8. The Garden by Moonlight. Night fell upon Whitcombe Manor like a velvet curtain, soft yet heavy, wrapping the house in shadows and silence. The moon rose pale and watchful over the estate, its silver light filtering through drifting clouds, painting the lawns in a ghostly glow. The wind whispered through the yew hedges, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Poirot, ever sensitive to the rhythm of time, chose this hour deliberately. While the household retired to restless slumber, he slipped quietly into the gardens, his cane tapping softly on the gravel. He was no ghost, but his presence disturbed nothing. He moved with measured grace, his eyes glittering in the moonlight. The path from Lady Arabella's chamber window drew him once more. The footprints he had examined by day lay faint and blurred now, softened by evening dew. But Poirot was not deceived. He crouched low, running a careful finger across the gravel, then rising again with a knowing smile. Yes, yes, the theatre of illusion, but even the cleverest stage leaves behind its traces. The footprints ended abruptly, as before. Yet Poirot's eyes lifted beyond them, searching not for what was visible but for what was hidden. There, in the shadow of the tall yew hedge, the grass bore subtle scars, patches pressed flat, stems broken, soil disturbed. Poirot stepped lightly toward them, his polished shoes scarcely leaving a mark. He bent close. Ah, voilà! Here she passed, a lady in haste, guided not by force but by promise. She trusted someone. But see, his finger traced faint scuff marks. The trust led her not to freedom, but to secrecy. Deeper into the garden, beneath the dense embrace of the yew trees, Poirot's keen eyes caught a darker patch upon the earth. The soil was freshly turned, still moist, as though disturbed within the last night. Kneeling, he brushed away leaves and found hidden beneath them a bundle of objects. A travelling cloak, rich but simple, folded in haste. A small satchel, inside it a few coins and a folded map of the coast. A purse of money, unopened, lying as if abandoned. Poirot held the cloak in his hands, the fabric cool beneath his touch. He laid the satchel open, studying the map, its corners marked faintly in pencil, routes sketched toward Dover. He placed each item carefully back, arranging them as though preserving the scene of a play. She planned everything, he murmured softly, moustache quivering in thought. The money, the satchel, the map. This was no abduction. She wished to flee the chains of Whitcombe pride, but... He straightened, his eyes narrowing. If she planned her escape, why leave her preparations buried here? Why vanish with nothing? The moonlight shifted as clouds parted, casting its silver glow fully upon Poirot's thoughtful face. He stood very still, listening to the sigh of the wind through the hedges, the rustle of leaves, the faint hoot of an owl across the fields. Because, he said at last, his voice quiet but certain, she was deceived. Someone she trusted promised her freedom. They lured her away without her belongings. They led her with words, not force. And where did they lead her? Mon Dieu, into a trap. As he replaced the earth gently over the bundle, Poirot's mind sharpened. Each clue, glove, wax, footprints, letters, buried satchel, wove itself into a tapestry of betrayal. The pattern was forming, though not yet complete. From the shadow of the hedge, Poirot looked back at the looming silhouette of Whitcombe Manor. Its windows glowed faintly with candlelight, as though the house itself kept vigil. He whispered to the night, "Tomorrow, I shall draw them all together. The truth is close, so close, and Hercule Poirot shall see that Lady Arabella walks once more from shadow into light." The moon watched silently as Poirot returned to the manor, the secrets of the garden tucked safely within his little grey cells. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. Morning returned to Whitcombe Manor, but it did not bring peace. The pale light of dawn filtered through the mist, painting the great house in hues of grey, as though the very stones carried the weight of dread. Servants moved in hushed voices, eyes glancing over shoulders, fearful of unseen ears. The family, too, seemed restless, drawn faces, forced words, and strained silences. Hercule Poirot, however, was serenity itself. He descended to the drawing-room with his usual elegance, his moustache perfectly waxed, his step deliberate. A storm was rising, but he was its conductor. He requested the entire household assemble. Sir Reginald came first, his jaw set, his cane striking the floor with sharp authority. James followed, his smile forced, his eyes betraying nervous flickers. Clara entered last, quiet as always, hands clasped, gaze lowered, but Poirot's keen eyes noted the tension in her shoulders, the tremor she fought to conceal. The fire in the hearth spat softly as Poirot took his place by the mantelpiece. His voice when he spoke was calm, almost soothing, yet each word fell with the weight of judgment. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the disappearance of Lady Arabella, it is not what it seemed. No masked intruder carried her into the night. No, she left by her own design. She sought freedom from chains that bound her. She trusted another. But that trust was betrayed." The silence that followed was thick. Sir Reginald's knuckles whitened upon his cane. James shifted in his chair, his charm cracking into unease. Clara sat motionless, her eyes fixed upon the floor. Poirot lifted his hand gently, like a maestro halting his orchestra. "Let us consider." A glove, deliberately dropped. Footprints, arranged to deceive. A candle lit, though lamps were near. Letters, hidden in the library, speaking of an ally. And finally the satchel, the cloak, the money, buried in the garden, left behind. Does this tell of a kidnapping? None. It tells of planning and betrayal. James leapt to his feet, his voice loud, almost desperate. "Then who, Poirot? Who betrayed her? Do you accuse me? Is that it? You've heard the gossip of my debts, but I swear I'd never harm Arabella. Never." Poirot regarded him with calm eyes. "No, monsieur. You are careless, perhaps, reckless, yes. But your heart, it is not cruel enough for such a deception." Sir Reginald slammed his cane upon the floor. "Then what are you suggesting, Poirot? That someone under my roof has tricked my daughter? Absurd." Yet the anger in his tone could not mask the fear that lingered beneath. Poirot's gaze moved slowly, inevitably toward Clara Miles. She sat very still, her pale face unreadable, but the faintest tremor betrayed her. Poirot's voice softened. "Mademoiselle Clara, it was you who knew her heart most intimately, you to whom she confided her fears, her longing for escape. You who knew of the satchel, the money, the map. She trusted you above all others." Clara's hands tightened upon her lap, her lips pressing together. Poirot stepped closer, his tone now gentle, yet piercing as a blade wrapped in silk. "You promised her freedom, did you not? You told her you would help her flee, but instead you misled her. You drew her away, far from her belongings, far from safety. You guided her into a place where she would be hidden, unseen. A boathouse, abandoned upon the estate grounds, a gasp escaped from the maid in the corner. Sir Reginald stiffened, his face paling. James muttered under his breath, "Good God." Clara lifted her eyes at last. There was no outburst, no denial, only a hollow calm, as if her strength had drained away. I only wanted what was fair," she whispered. "Always Arabella, the heiress, the jewel, the one with everything. And nothing. Nothing but her shadow." Poirot inclined his head slowly, sorrow in his eyes, So you sought to remove her, to take her place in the light. Yet, mademoiselle, betrayal never shines. It leaves only darkness. The silence that followed was broken only by the fire crackling, by the distant call of a crow beyond the windows. Poirot's words lingered in the air like a verdict. The storm had gathered. The truth had been named. And soon the final act would bring its resolution. Chapter 10. The resolution. The storm that Poirot had summoned within Whitcombe Manor did not break with thunder. It fell instead into a silence so profound that even the fire seemed to hesitate in its crackle. Clara Miles sat frozen, her pale face lit by flickering shadows, the confession still trembling in the air. Sir Reginald, rigid as marble, leaned upon his cane as though the very weight of revelation bore him down. James, restless and pale, paced like a man desperate to escape the noose of tension tightening around them all. Poirot, however, remained calm, his little frame poised with the elegance of certainty. His voice, low and soothing, carried the authority of truth. "Lady Arabella is not gone forever," he said softly. "She is here, upon this very estate." Clara Miles, in her hunger for envy and inheritance, misled her into hiding. Not with violence, but with words sweet and poisonous. She promised freedom, but offered only captivity. Gasps rose from those present. Sir Reginald's stern mask faltered, and James's pacing stilled. Clara bowed her head, the last of her composure slipping away like sand through fingers. Poirot gestured to the constable, summoned earlier with quiet discretion. "Search the abandoned boathouse by the river's edge. You will find Lady Arabella there, weakened, confused, but alive." The constable departed swiftly. Moments stretched long, filled only with the anxious tapping of Sir Reginald's cane and the shallow breaths of Clara Miles. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, his fingers resting lightly on the carved wood, his gaze serene. At last, the sound of hurried steps returned. The constable entered, breathless, his voice ringing clear. "Lady Arabella has been found, sir. She is unharmed, though faint. She asks for water, and for her father." Sir Reginald's cane fell from his grasp. For the first time the iron in his voice melted. "My daughter, my Arabella." He turned, striding from the room with a speed that belied his age, the stern patriarch now only a father. James slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands, relief and shame mingling upon his features. Clara, pale as death, was taken gently into custody, her silence unbroken, her eyes dark with a sorrow that words could no longer mask. When the room was quiet once more, Poirot allowed himself to breathe deeply. His moustache twitched, his gaze turned inward. He spoke softly, not to the others, but to the truth itself. "It is always so. Betrayal wears the mask of friendship. Lady Arabella trusted too greatly. But in the end, the little grey cells, they speak, they guide and they reveal. The footprints false, the glove dropped, the wax upon the desk, the letters of despair, each a note in a melody that led us here. And now the symphony is complete." Later, as dawn broke anew over Whitcombe Manor, peace seemed to seep back into its stones. Lady Arabella, wrapped in a cloak, sat by the great window, gazing out at the mist rising from the fields. She was weary, but alive. Poirot, ever precise, stood beside her with gentle dignity. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "the shadows have passed. You are free to choose your path. But remember always, freedom is not found in flight alone. It is found in courage, in truth." Arabella's eyes glistened. "I will remember, Monsieur Poirot." Always Poirot bowed slightly, his task complete. As he departed Whitcombe Manor, The morning sun broke through the mist, lighting the path ahead. He paused once, looking back at the ancient house, and murmured with a faint, satisfied smile, "Ah, the truth. It always rises, like the sun." And so the case of the vanishing heiress came to its end, not with violence but with deception laid bare, trust restored, and Hercule Poirot, the guardian of order, departing once more into the quiet rhythm of life.